Hello, everyone. I am Bruce Johnson, and with me is my father, Dave Johnson, and we are trying to put together a series of videos to discuss church growth. And this is probably about our fourth take or fifth take on this, and we have bad internet, so we'll see how far we get today. I'm going to go ahead real quick here and share a PowerPoint that we're going to kind of follow as we go through this. So, the first thing we want to talk about, my dad is a retired healthcare CEO in our local town. We're not going to say which churches we are talking about here. Instead, we're going to say Bruce's church, which is in the LCA church that I attend, and then Dave's church, which is now a local mega church that had started in Brookings, South Dakota, or started growing in about 2007, 2008. Um, in the last 6 or 8 years, I've been studying this church to try to understand what it's been doing differently than the church I attend, where we're about 50% of the size we were 10 years ago. And again, this mega church has grown from the same size we were today uh, to, sorry, same size as what we are today, um, to many, many times the size we had been. So, on your screen now is actually a representation of the PowerPoint. Sorry, I am not able to turn it into a normal PowerPoint slide. I can't see and I can't access the controls when I do that. So, up above here we have two churches. On the left here we have Dave's church, which is again the church he's attended, which has been growing by double digits for the past 15 years, and my church in around 2008. And this is just a graphic representation. When you fast forward to 2024, these two churches, this is Dave's church, and then this is the church I attend, and how much growth they've had. If anybody wonders, when I was creating these graphics, I was growing them, shrinking them in accordance with the same size both churches had shrank and grown respectively. So that's kind of where we're sitting at. The reason we started having these discussions is because we started talking to other people about this growth. And I, from an academic perspective, had been diving into this to better understand what was going on. And the deeper I got, the more I realized how complex this is and how challenging it is for folks, and especially folks that attend my church. And as Dave will talk about, folks that might be a little older. Not that that necessarily is we should stereotype, but there is a challenge there. So these discussions, we hope to start today just to talk a little bit about our background and a little bit of a narrative of the comparison. And in later videos, we hope to talk about actual data that supports kind of what we're thinking, what we're seeing, what supports the general conclusions from the church growth consulting industry that's out there, what they're seeing, how things change. There's a reality today that a recent NPR article came out and said the only churches that are growing in the United States by any margin, sizable margin, are mega churches. So for me, I go to a fairly traditional Lutheran church, and we have to deal with the reality that about 75% of those folks attending my church are over the age of 65. Whereas at Dave's church, the lion's share of people that are attending are between the ages of 20 and 50 years old. So it's kind of the opposite of that. So anyway, these discussions are just for us to record this, to talk about this, so maybe others can listen to it if they're curious or would like to understand a little more, or understand what we've read and we've researched over the last 6 to 8 years regarding this topic. Um, One of the things when I started diving into this, I became quite perplexed when I would try to have these discussions with other church leaders, that I was really running into a brick wall. And folks, you don't know what you don't know. So again, these discussions hopefully are to discuss a little bit the issue and talk about those things. One other slide before I turn it over to Dave, and he can give a little bit of his historical background when it comes to attending church and attempting to live a religious life. This was another diagram I made. This is from 2008. And again, that was Dave's church, Bruce's church. Dave actually went to a different church over the last 30 years, but instead of calling these churches who they actually are, we thought we'd try to give a little bit of anonymity. So in 2008, these churches were the same size. Fast forward to 2024, this is where they're at today. There's approximately 15 churches in our community. We operate in a college town with around 28 to 34,000 people, depending on if college is in session. And over here, thought I would create a diagram of what's happened to most of the Protestant churches in our community, again, looking at their size. So in 2008, we had a number of mainline Protestant denominations, so on and so forth. When you fast forward to 2025, almost all of the Protestant denominations shrank by about 50%. So this diagram is representative here in the 2025 of what's happened. Then if you fast forward to 2041, based on all of the data that we have collected, which we will share at a later time, this is like going to be the likely impact where you have two large churches. I'm not going to say who those churches are, and you got a scattering of a couple other ones. But things don't look good. And again, this is based on data we have reviewed from, in some cases, from the actual denomination's head office that has published this information. This data is not Dave Johnson's, it's not Bruce Johnson's. All right, enough about that. David, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of history about your experience in church? And later we're going to ask what is the purpose of church?
Thanks, Bruce. Going back to the 50s and 60s, I grew up in a normal home, parents, brother, sister, went to a Lutheran church in the 50s, attended Sunday school as most kids my age and most people seem to be doing back then. Got through all the years of Sunday school because mom and dad said that's what we were going to do. So we went until about confirmation time in high school. And then it was kind of like, I'm not sure I'm learning a whole lot. I'm not sure I'm enjoying this. I'm not sure I'm getting a lot out of it. And are there not other ways to not have to go on Sunday? And it's a situation, I think, that was not unusual back then because I would see my friends, etc., doing the same and all of a sudden not going. And if one were to fast forward today, 50 to 75 years later, it seems to be the same thing from what I've observed in terms of young people attending, etc. So when we moved to Brookings, we started attending the church here, the Methodist Church, and I attended there for 30 to 40 years. And then there were some issues that happened for which I just decided I didn't want to keep attending and serving that church and in that capacity, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought I would try this other church that I knew a few people who went there, and it was growing. And so I attended that and found what a difference there was in all kinds of different things. The, excuse me, the service itself was conducted very different than traditional Methodist Lutheran churches, et cetera, was. And so I was not used to that, but I found it refreshing. I found the music refreshing. I found it a biblically based teaching experience as opposed to a kind of preaching experience in the sermons or message. So it was enjoyable. It was energetic. It was spiritually, when I went in, it was really a spiritual experience that I can't almost describe, but I just felt very different by the setting, by the lighting, by the music, by all aspects of it. It was just a very emotional, spiritual experience for me. Part of that too was as I would look around, it was the ages of people, some high school, but more college kids. There were just tons of college kids, 18 to 22, 23. There were many young adults there. And what was interesting, I observed from my experience in Methodist and Lutheran churches, etc., as people came in, typically older people, we get there early so we can sit in the back. And here were these young people coming in, and they were looking for the front rows. They were all coming in and filling to the front. And as later people came in, they had to sit in the back, which was really a different experience to observe. And a lot of those young people came in carrying Bibles, carrying other devotional books, possibly. They weren't just still glossy, they had papers in them. So you knew that these were Bibles that had been used. They'd been attending maybe some worship classes of types, some what we would have called Bible studies or Sunday school or whatever. But as a group, they were using their Bible. I remember talking to a person I've gotten to know through a relative who said he noticed that the first time he came in, all these young people carrying Bibles, and one of us made the comment, back in that age and back in that day, we hardly knew where our Bible was, let alone did it look like it was worn and we had used it routinely. So it was just really invigorating to see all these young people in the church. You mentioned earlier, Bruce, about the percentages of young versus old, and I'm looking around and I could hardly spot gray hairs like me with all these young people. So it was very spiritual, not religious, different issue we'll get more into. But I came to the conclusion after attending numerous times that I have been missing the point of Christianity or religion or a spiritual experience and a personal relationship that I was starting to develop with Christ and with God that I hadn't known before through this experience. I experienced being what I thought was a Christian and serving the church. We'll get into that more, but I had never really developed an understanding of becoming more Christ-like and a spiritual experience of a relationship close with Christ and with God. And so it altered not just my church attending experience, it altered who I am and who I hope to be.
Yeah,
Throw it
that's
back to you from there.
yeah. We had discussed a couple times as we've done this video about 5 times now, but had discussed before. My experience was the exact same as what yours was. When I was in high school, I think probably about 15 years old, I had gotten a job at a restaurant in town, and I was working every Sunday. And frankly, I was happy to be working every Sunday. I had no desire to go to church. I didn't get a lot from that. It's not that there were people there that weren't trying to share that message and that meaning, but it clearly was not, it didn't connect, and it didn't connect with almost anybody I went to church with. I know that because of the many people that I had gone to church with, they don't go to church anymore. Those folks that I keep into contact with, I'm sure a few do here and there, but largely that my generation, earlier Gen X, younger Gen X, whatever that means, and the millennial generation have left that a lot of those traditional churches. And even though we don't want to stereotype that, well, there's an age gap here, you can't, you have to acknowledge it. You don't have a choice. There is an age gap here. And I think we're trying to explore what's the difference. Now, I had attended your church about 6, 7, 8 years ago when you'd first gone there, and I remember you inviting me in and saying you have to see this praise band, and I did, and I got done, and I said, now that's how you do it, because it was so professional and it sounded good, and they had done everything to kind of keep the volume down so you weren't blowing people's heads off, but it was so powerful and extremely meaningful. And when you see that, and as you say, you experience that, you begin to realize what the difference between religion and spirituality is these are different things. And I think there's a very strong desire to have the spiritual, but maybe an issue with the religious. And later on, we'll also talk about there seems to be a connection with denominationalism, where many of these growing churches that have turned into kind of mega churches now, and just as a technical definition, when a church has more than 2,000 attenders weekly, that is considered a mega church at that point. And your church is about 2,200. with a population of college students at South Dakota State University that is extremely high. I teach at South Dakota State University, and I would say of a class of 50, 12 students, undergraduate students, attend your church and are involved in. I want to be careful to say Bible studies. They're in small groups
Right.
where they're
Yeah.
working to
Small
develop them.
groups.
Yes, they're small groups, and they do things like having accountability partners. And when you talk to them, you realize, oh, this is very much about developing yourself spiritually, obviously having to do that with other people. And at the root of that, it's discipleship. And to fast forward to the end of these videos, the solution to most of this is not darkening the windows and getting the concert lighting and everything else. It seems to be very, very closely linked with discipleship, and that's where the real change is. So we don't want to keep this video too long because we've tried it a couple times and gotten it up to 50 minutes, and we want to keep it less than that. But why don't we leave on this? So our question today is trying to understand what is the purpose of church? Um, I'll let you start. What do you think when you think of the purpose of church and just some thoughts?
Just a quick comment, Bruce, back to the attending church earlier and noticing all the young people leaving after confirmation or
Hmm.
high school or somewhere in there. I also noticed when that was happening over the years how much the parents of those people all of a sudden weren't showing up. And so as the kids would no longer go, or maybe the parental thinking was, we no longer have to do that, they're now old enough, somehow the parents would drop back. And I remember talking in a meeting I was in one time about making sure that new people were welcomed in, about maybe in some manner doing some follow-up, that when people do leave a church and you notice they're no longer there, making just a cordial, we miss you, making a call, somebody to just say, we've missed seeing you, et cetera, to see, why that may be. That wasn't followed up or accepted very well, but I realized when I left too, and nobody ever called, that I really wasn't missed there. I as much as I tried to do things, I guess I wasn't missed. So when people are leaving churches and nobody is concerned about that, and they're continuing to leave, as we'll explore some more, I think that's an opportunity that unfortunately is missing, that nobody seems to show interest in, whether it's young people or even their parents and others that leave the church.
Have a, if
Back
I
to the purpose of
can I
church.
quick cut you
Go
off there
ahead.
for a second? So in a
Yeah.
previous discussion, we had talked about that, and I had mentioned, I wonder if that's because you have a, I hate to say this, but you have a superficial relationship with that organization. If
Obviously, it's not as deep as I thought it was.
No, and when I think about church, and I've been in those meetings before and had many people say, "Well, we need to go contact those folks." It hit me. That's not who we are. It's not. It's just not what we do. Is contacting the relationships I've had, and I hate to say that again. We're not that deep. It was we come
No.
here. We're here on Sunday morning. Our kids try to go to Sunday school, and I've actually been with groups that uh, tried to attempt to get deeper and create a deeper connection. But once COVID hit, that ended because I think we found that people trying to lead it, it was so much planning and activity and just a truism I believe in. If the cost is too high, so the time spent going and doing the activity at church, if that's too high, relative to the benefit that you're getting out of it, then people aren't going to be coming back. They're going to be saying, I'm good,
No.
thanks. And I think in the model that we currently have, that's the problem, is you have a broken model. And we're talking right now because that model needs to be challenged. And I think we're finding it quite hard when we have these discussions to challenge this and to say, this isn't working. One thing we've said before is it's church is turned into an activity. It's not maybe even a religion or a spiritual thing that we do. It's an activity. And for most millennials and Gen Xers, I would say we've got enough activities in our life. We don't need more activity. If you talk about spirituality, though, we'll see some data here in a moment to say people are craving this. So sorry, I'll turn it back over to you, Dave.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Historically, and I think the model being broken is maybe a way to put it. I look at it a little bit as it is the model that we've known. The trouble is the model that we've known and run for the last 50 to 100 years is not the model that's going to succeed today.
Yeah,
So in this new generation of young people, the model is broken from their perspective. From
yeah,
our perspective, many of us old people, it's still a fine model because it's what we've always known. But there's a
you know,
complete disconnect with young people saying, just as you said, Bruce, that model is broken. It's old. It's got to change
yeah,
if we're going to be part of it. As I look at historically my church service, we went we would hear about tithing and using your talents and all that, which I did. I tried to serve. I was on committees. I was on boards. I retired. I went and mowed. I painted at the church. I was serving and doing everything I could. But I ultimately realized I was serving the church and kind of the people there, but I was doing absolutely zero to deepen my spiritual relationship with God and with Christ. And so I was serving, but I was really just working and doing busy work at the church, thinking if I'm serving and then they want me to use my talents, whether they were talents or not, I was giving of that, but it was to what you and I have gotten to now kind of call it the spiritual activity center, because churches tend to be of the older and traditional, I think, places where there's all kinds of programs going on. There's Bible studies, there's activities, there's things that keep us busy and committed and almost overcommitted. And especially for younger people, it's more commitment than they can afford to do, but
yeah,
committed to that church entity and its programs and activities. And very little in the traditional church, from my experience at least, that seems to be spiritually discipleship driven to take us deeper on a path of growth in our relationship with God, with Christ. And so the purpose of church, when I saw it in a different light, it completely changed and made me reanalyze uh, what I've done in the past. And I really then started seeing this sort of programmatic and social activity center we call the church as it's been in the past.
yeah.
So,
And in defense to that, if you don't know any different, well, how would you
right,
know what this could be or what it might be? Because you know what you know. One gentleman that
right.
I have cited before, who was a part of the Methodist Church in creating a program to transform churches, and unfortunately passed away. He talks about that. How do most of us get to church? And the answer for the 50, 75, 100 years previous, it was because mom and dad brought you there. The expectation was you would keep going. And then you hit a generation or two generations that said, I I don't need another activity in my life. I've got too many of those. Give me something else, but please not another activity.
Yeah.
No. Other thoughts are okay, so I think we found agreement here. The purpose of the church has to change. The framework for it must change because it the model that we had been used is not, no one external to that desires that anymore. And the reality is the diagrams I showed earlier, you have the churches that are shrinking. Sorry, the churches that are shrinking are, you can tell when you walk in, people are older and older and older and older. When you go to those churches that have changed, then you have all these young people, you have these 20, 30, 40, 50 year olds, and you realize, okay, there and change needs to happen. This is not sustainable. In fact, it's detrimental. So my
Yeah,
apologies
the only
earlier.
thing I'd
You
add,
froze up on me. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
my only thought is, I think people sometimes in the traditional church look at it more from a standpoint of an internal focus of what I like. And if they want to do that at these mega churches and they want whatever that nonsense is in these places, let them be. But we all like what we've got. But that takes out the equation of the, even at the higher levels of the organizations that are saying, however, if you don't change that mindset from an internal focus to an external focus, the doors will be getting locked not too far down the road. So it's easy for us older people in our traditional world to say, that's fine for whatever they want to do in these other churches and places and stuff that I don't understand, but I'm happy with what I've got. I think the piece that's missing is if your commitment is discipleship in internal and keeping people coming to Christ, you have to have young people to keep these doors open in these places. And if you don't, and you can't make that leap to realize your purpose is not about you, your purpose is about the future in your church, then it will be locking up at some point. So
Yeah.
I think us older people have to make the decision of, do I understand that? And am I willing to commit to something that I don't even understand? I don't know that I even like. I don't know if I will like it. But you got to say it's not about you.
Yeah.
You've got to come to
It's
grips with, what's this about? And it's locking the doors of the church because we're locked into where we've been and where we still want to stay, or it's into making this church functioning 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago and growing. It's a different
I
church then.
yeah, I can't see it any better than that. How about we leave on this one? This was an article I had found. Um, Data from 2021 of 18 to 25-year-olds. Um, 78% believe in the existence of God. Okay. So we think it's, well, people must have stopped believing at some point. It's no, they still believe. In fact, that's very similar to what it was 20, 30, 50 years ago. 74% believe there is no value in church. So that's obviously a point of we're going to have to dive deeper in. 61% think churches have too many problems. I would say often have too many committees trying to solve said problems. 48% say they don't have time for church. Goes back to a cost benefit in my mind. We have to change how we're doing this. 36% of people think church is boring. Some people may look at that and say, well, at least it's not the majority. Um, it's too high. We'll leave it at that. And the sad one for me was 8% actually see a religious leader as a role model. Only 8% see that. I think one of the things you can derive from that is, okay, this isn't an issue of people not believing. It is a term I had learned in the last 6 months to a year is orthopraxy. The way we're practicing this is not, it's not working. We have to explore other alternatives. Last thoughts, Dave?
None. I'd like to continue. You and I have jumped into this much deeper than I ever thought, but I am a believer that
Yes, we
it's
did.
something that we have an obligation to do. Uh, we just can't shirk this one and just say, well, let it all go. And I would challenge all of us, almost 80-year-olds, in our traditional worship services and in our traditional churches and all of that, to really try and open your mind to being where churches need to be going with younger people, or they simply will not to, they will fail to exist. And I think in turn, we then have to say, did we not fail then in not understanding what has to be done? And I'm old enough and have been to enough funeral homes and that lately to know my time to talk to the man above is getting close. And I want to be able to have a good conversation about what I tried to do at that time of meeting. And right now, it's what keeps driving me is because I'm not willing. I've got to join this young guy, a son of mine, in trying to help other places, to help other older people understand we really have an obligation here to the Lord to try and fix this problem. So enough
All
said
right.
for now.
All right. We'll go ahead and leave it that. Let's maybe do a quick prayer. God, thank you for helping to guide us in this adventure, frankly. Help us to always to continue to do your will and not do Bruce's will or do Dave's will. To explore and to keep an open mind as new information is presented. To again fulfill your word and for our Savior Jesus Christ. In your name we pray. Amen. Have a wonderful day,
Thank you very much, Bruce.
and y'all take care, and I will try to figure out how to turn this off. Take care.